Okay, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about us. Obviously Ryan kicked us off talking just a little bit about legal trends. I think it's always good getting insight and information from kind of validated outside parties, and we're going to go through that a little bit today. The reason we're talking about cybersecurity in the context here today is that I was chatting with the group at the back that all of these automations and AI platforms and tools that are available to allow us to work faster can kind of fall apart and take us off the rails if our cybersecurity posture is not, being kept up to today's standards. So I want to walk you through a couple things today, give you some context around how we think about being proactive in a cybersecurity perspective, and then hopefully give you some resource that you can go back and think about in your firms. So you can read, this is one of the quotes I picked up at a conference a couple years ago that I absolutely love, is that cybersecurity is not a product you install, it is a practice you instill. And the reason that I come back to this so frequently is that far too often we end up being invited in to talk with businesses in all types of fields, and they start asking us about the tools. What antivirus do you use? What backup software do you use? And I think it's the wrong question, because just like this restaurant has access to the same ingredients that restaurant has, they produce a different output, right? We come here because of the mastery that the chefs have over their trade, the process, the environment, the experience, right? All of those types of things. Nobody's going to ask them, where the steak came from. What kind of cow was it? Because that actually doesn't matter as much as the practice that they've put into it. Same in your firms. We need to be thinking about all of those items on there. Now, the other thing about cybersecurity being a foundational element is that there's a balance to be struck for every single organization. And just because you're all in the same industry doesn't mean that balance is the same. You all have different risk tolerances, client profiles, knowledge sets, all of those types of things. So the way that I always describe it is that if we think of an old-fashioned balance scale, if we have security on one side and convenience or ease of access on the other, they are inverse. So as our security increases, our convenience, our ease of doing things decreases. A good example is actually even prepping for this. I was trying to share my PowerPoint with Ryan, and our organizational security was like, no, you can't share it with Ryan. Like, okay. So we have things in place that have made it more secure but less convenient. Vice versa, if we go the route of maximum convenience, then our security typically suffers. And that'll mean lots of different things depending if we're talking about a firewall and we're turning off rules and VPNs and multi-factor. There's obvious security risk there. But when we think about AI, and I'm sorry I forget names so quickly, but Amanda. I was thinking Amanda, but I was like, it's either Amanda or Andrea. Amanda was talking about how she's like, I don't get it. I can access ChatGPT on this network, but not on this network. And so in the context of your organizations, that convenience might be around how you're managing data. We also heard some people talking about this concept of what's called shadow IT, which is when your staff, your paralegals, your lawyers are using tools and platforms that you haven't actually endorsed, configured, secured. And does everybody have an AI policy in use in their firms already? Yeah, kind of so. Just a real quick aside, one of the analogies that I often use, because we talk a lot in construction and manufacturing, I always say, imagine if your team showed up to the office tomorrow and there were 10 new trucks in the parking lot and 10 new laptops in the boardroom. Everybody's getting a new truck and a laptop today. Which one of those assets has more clarity around the acceptable use?
The truck.
Yeah. Right? Don't speed, don't drink and drive, don't take underage passengers, don't hook your trailer up to it, don't, do all of the dumb things that contribute to driving a truck into a ditch and losing a truck. But then we give people a laptop and we're like, make sure you have a password and tell us if you have any problems. Well, you're all lawyers. You all work in law firms. Like, we all recognize that if we don't set guidelines around the acceptable use and something goes wrong, it affects the entire firm. And who is responsible? Is it the person who did it even though there was no policy that said they couldn't? Or is it the firm that didn't set expectations and enforce standards and all of those things? So I wanted to, like I said, just share a little bit of information. So this information comes from Coalition. They're an insurance carrier. They do a lot of cyber work. And we can see that email-based attacks make up a large percentage of the total cyber incidents and claims that are paid. And more often than not, an email compromise is the first step to executing a fund transfer fraud type of attack. I'll just let them place some of the food here. Awesome. And what I find interesting is when they start talking about averages and the significance of claims, because we can see that they become quite significant with the average fund transfer fraud coming from a business email compromise at 112,000. And I think that the reason I focus on that side of it is that there's a lot of doom and gloom in the cybersecurity world about ransomware. Right, about getting all of your stuff encrypted and locked up and held hostage. And that, for sure, those are the big ones that you hear about because the average demand is more than $1 million on ransomware, but the frequency of those attacks is quite a bit less. I know there's a lot to read here, but what this slide is showing us is that lack of expertise is named by 40% of victims, and this is talking about the ransomware side, and having security gaps that the organization was not aware of. So I think that that's one of the great things of all of you coming out here today. Hopefully you go back and you ask some really good questions, because at the root of cybersecurity, I think it starts with leadership asking better questions, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Is anybody familiar with Mythos? No? So we all know that AI is rapidly advancing. Anthropic, the company that makes Claude, they created a cybersecurity focused AI agent, presumably with good intentions, right? They were going to use it to scan and find vulnerabilities and identify them so that they could be remediated. But it did its own thing, and it actually exploited the vulnerabilities that it discovered. And it was so scary to the people at Anthropic that they actually delayed its release, and they gave private access for like all the big tech companies to say, hey, Microsoft, Google, Apple, like, you guys need to take this and run it on your stuff and fix whatever it finds. Because the day we turn this thing on, there's a storm brewing out here, and it's like, really? And we're still doing this? It's supposed to be for good, but we all know that if they've managed to build this AI, somebody else is working on it with a maybe less noble outlook on it. So we all need to keep up, and we all need to make sure that we're aware of these risks and that we have a proactive approach to how we're managing our cybersecurity. So again, one of the things that I pulled from this particular slide, obviously there's a bunch of information here. This is talking about data encryption and data exfiltration. Does everybody know data exfiltration, what that means? So what changed in ransomware years ago was that they used to get into your network, encrypt your data so that you didn't have access to it, and then they would say, pay us a fee and we'll give you the decryption key so that you can unscramble that data. Well, as this attack became more and more common, businesses started realizing, well, if I just have a good backup, why would I pay the ransom? So now what they do is when they get in, they exfiltrate data from your network, they encrypt the local stuff, and they say, that fee that you used to pay for the decryption key, now what it's really about is maybe a quicker path to recover for you, but also if you don't pay us the money, we will release this data publicly. What will that do to your reputation? What will that do to your losses outside of your operational side of things? And it's a much larger part of the ransomware world than the encryption side. But what stood out to me is that only 54% used their backups, and this might not be the one. It came into here, was that organizations are getting faster. 53% fully recovered after a week, which is up from 35%. But that implies to me that 47% are still not recovered after a week. And what would life look like in your firm and in your relationships with your clients if you were unable to access information and serve your clients and give them any kind of certainty about the privacy and confidentiality of that data? All right, so that's all kind of the doom and gloom stuff. I want to just give you a couple of little things that maybe will help you process how to approach cybersecurity, because it's an incredibly broad topic. There are two frameworks in particular that we educate people on. The first, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, so the National Institute of Science and Technology. And what they've done is they have taken and given us this framework. It all starts at the top with the governance. We talked a little bit earlier about making sure that we have policies and that we have clarity on roles and all those types of things. But then a lot of people start going, well, where do I begin with the rest of my cybersecurity? You start at the left and you work your way to the right. So you start off first, and this might seem really basic, by identifying the technology that you have in your firm. It may shock you to know that most organizations don't know how many computers they have, who has them, what phones are tied into our networks, what IoT devices are on our network, what software platforms, what cloud services, what integrations do we actually have? Because much like if we wanted to secure this building, we can't do that until we know how do people get in and out of it, and what happens if, all of that. So we have to first start off with an inventory, an identification of what we have. We then move into planning, how do we protect it? So we have a door, how do we protect that door? Locks, guards, cameras, alarms, right? We have a software platform, how do we protect it? Multi-factor authentication, backups, identity management, those types of things. Now, in a perfect world, we're going to spend all our time on the left in identify and protect, because those are proactive activities. But we need to have an alarm system. We need to have a way of identifying when we have a security problem. Because the average time that an attacker lives in a network, I've seen it as in months, where they're saying between 6 and 14 months is an average amount of time that they have access, and they're figuring their way around without you knowing. And they're just building credibility as time goes. So if we detect something, we then need to make sure that we have an incident management plan, a response function. The time to be developing your incident response plan is now, not in the middle of an incident. So again, it's the same thing as the governance. What are the roles? What are the responsibilities? Who are our partners? What can we say? What can't we say? Who's authorized to do? All of those types of things. And then recovery. How do we get back to the work that we're doing? So from a leadership perspective, a lot of organizations find this structure very helpful. You can search it. You can ask me. I'll send you a copy of it. There's a lot of documentation on it. Let me just get through. The second framework we talk about are the CIS controls. So the Center for Internet Security. What does my next slide look like? Yes, my next slide is a little bit better. So what I'll point out here is that there are 18 categories of controls that are broken up into 153 total cybersecurity safeguards. So if you want to, be a leader in cybersecurity in the legal world, there's only 153 things that you have to do. Simple, right? The truth is, very few organizations will ever, get anywhere close to that. So what they've done is they've broken them into what they call implementation groups. So implementation group 1 is essential cyber hygiene. So at a bare minimum, there are 56 things that you should be doing. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those. If you have matured a little bit in your cybersecurity journey, you'd go to implementation group 2, which adds 74. And then if you had unlimited time, money, patience, you would go to implementation group 3. And again, this is all part of the reason we like these frameworks is that they're all publicly available. Again, you can search CIS controls and you'll get a list of all 153 of these. I want to make sure I get out of here on time, so I might blast through this a little bit quicker than I wanted to. The reason I have this up is that many organizations, the only time they actually stop and ask questions about their cybersecurity posture is when they have to fill out their cyber insurance application, right? And this is information, we partner with a lot of insurance brokerages, and I tell them that the questions that are on the application for cyber insurance are the wrong questions, right? Because we'll get questions like, confirm whether you have multi-factor authentication for remote access, and it drives me crazy. Confirm whether multi-factor authentication is enabled for remote access to all company email accounts. And a lot of times on these applications, we'll hear things like all, every, all of those types of absolutes that we can never say yes to. And if we take a step back, the CIS controls, they have a category called access control management. And implementation group 1 says we should do those 4 things. Group 2 are those, and then group 3. So if we truly wanted to secure our network, we would come and look at these controls, not just this arbitrary, do you have multi-factor authentication? But if I take one step further back, the question we're really trying to answer is, how likely is it that an intruder can penetrate our network? Have we addressed the most common causes of account compromise? And ultimately, how determined are we as an organization to address these risks? And my perspective is that if you're sitting as a leadership group, don't ask whether we have multi-factor authentication turned on. Ask these questions. Because you need to do more than just the bare minimum of that particular cyber insurance application item. And this goes on in a bunch of them. And so I think where I leave here is, in most organizations, cyber risk isn't a massive failure that just happened today. It is years of neglect. It's a reactive approach to, putting out fires rather than preventing them. We're not focused on that cyber hygiene. Still today, it shocks me how many organizations don't have appropriate password management and password policies and enforcement around that side of things. If you happen to use a password across more than one site or service, stop it. Go back to the office and change them all. It's a whole different talk. And then I think the last two, it's funny, I was chatting just before, far too often, I'm biased, I'm an IT provider, but far too often we find organizations shopping on price rather than business outcomes, expected value. And the interesting thing, 30% of IT service providers actually lose money on a quarterly basis. And the reason I think that that's interesting is that to me implies that 30% of organizations are working with a partner who can't properly invest in their own team and processes and tools to keep themselves secure, let alone their clients. So they're not delivering on their promises, and we've got that. So the questions that I had on here for the self-assessment are on the worksheet. We can have some time to talk about that. If you want to connect on LinkedIn or anything, that's me, but I'll be sitting over there. I'll look just like this. So, Sonia was going to just mention, we are running a webinar on Monday, diving deeper into the data from the Coalition Cyber Claims Report, and we'd love to have you attend. And I'm 2 minutes over time, so I'm sorry. Thank you. Here for questions, maybe after Angie has done her bit.
Perfect.
Yeah? Okay.